It started with a cargo ship quietly docking at a Chinese port. On board, more than 300,000 tons of soybeans, neatly packaged and stamped with Argentina's seal of approval. To anyone glancing at the paperwork, it looked like just another delivery in the endless tide of global trade. But within days, Chinese customs dropped a bombshell. Those beans weren't Argentine at all. They were American. The revelation sent shockwaves across the world. How could U.S. soybeans, supposedly banned under new tariffs, sneak into China dressed in another country's clothes? And perhaps even more intriguing, how did China catch the deception so quickly, when everything on paper seemed flawless? This wasn't just a story about crops. It was a scandal that exposed the desperation of U.S. farmers, the fierce tactics of global trade, and the lengths nations will go to protect their economic power. The drama unfolded in April 2025. The ship in question had traveled more than 10 days, carrying one of the most valuable commodities on Earth, soybeans. When it pulled into China's Tianjin port, the paperwork was immaculate. Certificates of origin claimed the beans came from Argentina, the third largest soybean exporter in the world. But something felt off. During routine inspections, customs officials tested the beans. The results raised immediate red flags. Argentine soybeans typically contain protein levels under 34%. These beans tested above 35%, a profile that matched U.S. soybeans almost perfectly. Then came another clue: the sacks used for packaging. Instead of being sourced from South America, investigators traced them back to suppliers in the United States. In one move, the disguise collapsed. China had caught a deception worth nearly $200 million. And the global spotlight turned to the U.S., Argentina, and the murky underworld of international trade. You might wonder, why such fuss over soybeans? Aren't they just another crop? The answer is no. In modern global trade, soybeans are power. China, with its 1.4 billion people, has a massive appetite for food. While it grows plenty of rice and wheat at home, soybeans are different. They're the backbone of livestock feed, the essential ingredient for tofu, cooking oil, and countless processed foods. Without them, China's food system would wobble. But here's the catch. China can't grow enough soybeans domestically. Its climate and farmland are better suited to rice and wheat, leaving soybeans underproduced. That shortfall forces China to import more than 100 million tons of soybeans every year, making it the single largest buyer in the world. For decades, Brazil and the United States dominated China's soybean imports. Together, they supplied more than 80% of the total demand. This gave farmers in both countries not just a market, but leverage. Whoever fed China's soybean appetite had influence. And influence in today's geopolitical climate is worth more than gold. The seeds of this scandal were planted long before the ship set sail. In early 2025, Donald Trump returned to the White House. And just like in his first term, he wasted no time declaring China America's #1 rival. By February, tariffs of 10% were slapped on all Chinese imports. By April, that number had soared to over 200%. China fired back immediately. It imposed its own heavy tariffs on U.S. energy, automobiles, and agricultural products. Then came the hammer blow: soybeans. For American farmers, the announcement was devastating. Overnight, they lost access to their biggest customer. China had been buying more than 20 million tons of U.S. soybeans annually, worth billions. With that door slammed shut, warehouses filled with unsold beans, and prices plummeted. Reports began to emerge of farmers in the Midwest sitting on mountains of unsellable crops. Some struggled to pay off loans. Others abandoned plans to plant the next season's crop altogether. And that's when desperation gave birth to deception. With China off limits, American exporters started looking for back doors. Rumors began circulating that U.S. soybeans were being quietly shipped to South America, Argentina and Brazil in particular. Once there, they were repackaged, given new paperwork, and sent to China under a fresh identity. On the surface, it was clever. In reality, it was reckless. This wasn't the first time either. Back in 2024, a shipment of 200,000 tons labeled "Product of Argentina" had already been busted by Chinese customs. Inspectors discovered the beans were actually grown in the American Midwest. That batch was caught within just 48 hours. Later, that same year, another shipment disguised as Brazilian soybeans was intercepted. Once again, the scam fell apart under inspection. The April 2025 incident, 300,000 tons, was simply the boldest attempt yet. Instead of slipping under the radar, it became a global embarrassment. So how did China keep catching these tricks? The answer lies in its increasingly high-tech customs system. First, inspectors looked at the beans themselves. Protein levels, oil content, and even microscopic chemical markers act like fingerprints. Each region's soybeans have unique profiles based on soil, climate, and farming methods. Second, they tracked the shipping routes. Using GPS data, Chinese customs traced freighters' paths. If a ship supposedly departed from Buenos Aires, but had suspicious stops in the Gulf of Mexico, alarms went off. Third, they used AI and mass spectrometers to analyze samples at a molecular level. These tests could determine with 98% accuracy whether soybeans came from the United States, Brazil, or Argentina. Finally, China deployed blockchain tracking, requiring shipments to be logged from farm to port. Every step, from the planting field to the cargo hold, was recorded. Any discrepancy in the chain immediately flagged the shipment for inspection. In other words, smugglers weren't just up against inspectors. They were up against a system designed to make fraud impossible. Unfortunately, the scandal didn't just hurt the United States, it dragged Argentina and Brazil into the mess. China temporarily suspended some soybean contracts with Argentina while investigations took place. That decision alone caused economic losses estimated at $200 million. Argentina's agriculture ministry was furious, filing complaints at the WTO and accusing the United States of wrecking their credibility. Brazil faced similar pressure. After earlier cases of fake Brazilian beans showed up, China forced Brazilian exporters to agree to strict traceability rules. Any violation would mean export quota cuts and heavy penalties. For both Argentina and Brazil, the scandal was a nightmare. Their most important customer, the one they relied on for billions in trade, suddenly questioned their reliability. Back in the United States, the scandal highlighted just how much pain tariffs had caused. Farmers in Iowa, Illinois, and Minnesota saw their profits collapse. Some were forced to sell land, others leaned heavily on government subsidies just to stay afloat. The irony? Even though the United States had an abundance of soybeans, it couldn't sell them where they were needed most. Desperate attempts to sneak beans into China only backfired, creating diplomatic incidents and worsening relations. Worse, the scheme angered China further. Instead of reopening markets, it convinced Beijing to double down on enforcement and diversify imports even faster. At its core, this scandal revealed something larger. Trade wars don't just punish governments. They punish people. Farmers in the United States were left bankrupt. Exporters in Argentina lost contracts. Consumers in China faced rising prices for basic food items. Even small businesses around the world felt the shockwaves. Tariffs may look like tools of power, but in practice, they're blunt weapons. And soybeans became the collateral damage in a battle for global dominance. The soybean scandal might sound like a quirky story about mislabeled beans, but it's really about something bigger. It raises the question, if nations are willing to bend the rules over something as simple as soybeans, what happens when the fight escalates to semiconductors, oil, or rare earth metals? Soybeans may seem ordinary, but they sit at the heart of global food security. And food is power. Whoever controls it controls more than markets. They control leverage over billions of lives. For now, China's inspectors caught the fraud, America's farmers are still reeling, and Argentina is demanding justice. But one thing is certain, the soybean war isn't over. It's just one chapter in a much larger story of rivalry, deception, and the high stakes of global trade. If you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your comments for more.